why don't we get started? I want to thank everybody for joining and those that'll be coming in as we go. This is really a huge topic for us, and really happy that you're joining to share some perspective on security awareness training, some best practices, strategies, and why it's important. Oscar, if you can pop to the next slide. As far as introductions, my name's Chris Eula. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy. Oscar Jones is our CISO, and I'll introduce him properly. One of the reasons that we think this is an important topic, we know this is an important topic, is exactly what you're seeing up on the screen without me kind of restating it. It's such a high percentage. Over 84% of all of the attacks still are preventable and caused by humans, either caused by humans intentionally, which is a very small percentage, or caused by humans unintentionally. And regardless of the amount of technology we put in place to try to prevent this, there's always going to be better and better uh, attempts from the threat actors on trying to trick you. And all of us that go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever your social media thing is, you can see how AI has advanced in just 3 months on even video enhancements and changes of a person speaking as if they're a live person saying things that they wouldn't normally say. So what used to be easy for an individual to identify, where it kind of stereotypically was, words in broken English, I could easily identify that. That doesn't happen anymore because everybody can use AI. So one of the reasons we think this is huge, and this is really the number one force field for any organization, regardless of the size, are your employees, right? It just is that fact, especially when you look at the percentages of what the risk is. Next slide, Oscar. So when we sit down and kind of look at, and I think one of the things that individuals don't understand until they start actually getting into security awareness training is the reality of the risk and what the cost can be to a company. And these numbers are really large. But the thing I want to kind of point out is the bottom right, where you're looking at 227 days. That on average is the time to breach. And what that means in common terminology would be a threat actor is actually in the account and does not become visible until an average of 227 days. So that means the threat actor is perusing your environment, trying to get where they want to be. And part of the reason we know this is changed, because if you asked me this question about a year ago, it was in the 90 days, 87 to 92 days. What was going on a bunch of years ago was the threat actor was actually trying to get to your honeypot of gold, whatever that was, secret recipe, money, PII. Now what they're trying to do is to prevent you from functioning as a business, because it's very hard to sit down and kind of quantify how much stolen information is worth. But you do know, if you ask a CEO or a board, they know how much it costs if you're down for a day or a week. And we've seen that as simplistically as, or as obvious as a car wash organization that had 400 car washes, and their point of sale system was uh, uh, broken by a threat actor, and 3/4 of the business couldn't run. And that gentleman knew he was losing almost $5,000 per day per car wash, per week per car wash. So he's like, I got to get this back up, right? That he knew that. He didn't know how much the information would have been worth if they stole credit card data or whatever. Next slide, Oscar. So when we sit down and kind of look at security awareness training, there's really these 7 steps, and Oscar's going to go into some detail of it, and I'm not going to read this for you, and we'll send all of this data to you. But there is a process, right? And if no one's ever done security awareness training before, you clearly need buy-in from leadership to know that it's valuable, and we would spend way more time on those first couple slides talking about the importance of it. But it's also then understanding the environment, what protections are in place, what risk there is, and really then trying to schedule training and review, and then the results of the training, good stuff and bad stuff, to sit down and continue to mature the process. And that's exactly why we set up this call for all of you today. Next slide, Oscar. So when we sit down and kind of look at security in general, security awareness training happens to be bottom right. But these are the things, these are about 30 things that we think as a security consulting company. And I'm going to do a little advertising. We just yesterday re-won our number one slot for global security services from Gartner peer review. So we're really excited about that. And that's really anonymous from our customers going in and saying good things about us. These are the things that you should be looking at. And inside of security awareness training, there are phishing simulations, there are policies and procedures that need to be there. It affects your governance. It touches these other things, but these are the things that you would be looking at as an organization to see why we should be doing training and how it affects everything else, or how the interdependency of having certain technologies in place, endpoint protection, all that. We don't want anyone to feel like, hey, you can take your eyes off the windshield just because there's bumpers on the road or I'm wearing seatbelts. No, you have to still be alert and aware, and you're the first line of defense. And that's the thing we want to leave you with, as well as the best practices piece. Next one, Oscar. So, quick introduction. Oscar Jones is our CISO. He leads our delivery team of all of our fractional services of CISOs, risk managers, policy writers, analysts. He is one of the greatest assets of our organization. And as you heard, for those that were on a minute or so early, he is a huge Cowboys fan. And this is the only recognition I'm going to allow him to talk about that. So later on, if you want to talk one-on-one, you'll get a little ingest of that. But he has tremendous insight and leads our team, as well as leading individual accounts, key accounts for us. So he has both hands-on experience with customers, as well as guiding our organization in this space. And again, security awareness training is a huge factor for us. And Oscar, thanks for joining and taking the time.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to clarify that I rarely ever talk about the Cowboys.
That's good to know.
Just 3 to 4 times a day is all that I can, muster. I've been doing this for a little bit over 20, 25 years. I've been here at CyberSecOps for a little bit over 2 years now. We have a great team. We listen to each other. We piggyback off of thought processes that everyone has. And we try to think about, how do we best make this as a review for the customers or potential customers. So we'll go ahead and get started. And thank you, Chris, for all the information that you've, added so far. So introduction to security awareness training, we've been doing it for years. I know we have. Everyone in this call has done it time and time again. You've done it through various different points, whether it be something like a KnowBe4, which I think we're all familiar with, or an NGO or other smaller companies that may be doing this as well. But the definition of it is how do you encompass the training and education of your employees? We talk about security policies, which we've been doing for 25, 30 years now, potential threats and safe practices to bolster organizational defenses against breaches, and not just breaches here at work. When we talk about security awareness training, we want to think about it in the sense that we want you to also think about how it affects you at home. A lot of the issues that you're going to run into are going to be from your home base. It's going to be when you go out to your favorite coffee shop or to your pharmacy, something of that nature, your grocery store. That's when you're going to run into the problems. For the most part, most of the things that we do internally, as far as security awareness, is it kind of compensates for any things that may happen. Somebody, how many people do you know with the EDR at home? Not many, if anyone has one. But you have one here at work. So if you have an issue, something happens as a breach or ransomware attack, your system will be disconnected fairly quickly. But what do you do when you're at home and you're just, going through your day and you're buying things online? Do you think about how this training can affect you as well? So we're going to talk about the importance of mitigating security risk as vulnerabilities, how it empowers employees to recognize and respond appropriately, and the overview of training objectives. The primary goal is to enhance employees' ability to identify risk. That's really the key thing that we have to think about. Is a customer prepared to see a risk and then deal with that risk, or know what not to do when that risk occurs? I think that's the one thing that we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth. And if you have any questions during this session, please submit those, and Chris will read those out either during this call or right after the call. So now let's talk about the understanding of security threats and identifying and analyzing potential risk. Types of security threats. Let's talk about familiarizing with various threats: phishing, malware, ransomware, insider threats. And I actually pose a question to the group. Which one of these do you think is the most dangerous for us? Is it an insider threat? People get upset about their work environment. They sometimes make rash decisions that can put you at a risk at a later time frame. Is it ransomware because you have a threat actor who basically doesn't care about your environment, he just wants to steal your data and your information and your client's data? Is it malware? Somebody's went through the process of creating something that's going to activate once you click on it. It's going to execute. Or a phishing event, which I think is one of the easier ones to spot, because we talk about them all the time. We talk about phishing events. We talk about how people, what are they going to see? How is it going to look? Using the hover technique. So all of those things I feel like is definitely important to talk about. But I would love to get a readout from the individuals who are attending this call. Which one do you think is the most dangerous to you right now? So we're also going to talk about real world examples. And we talk about Target, which was a physical breach. We talk about Equifax, just the tangible risk that organizations face every single day. And I stated in a couple of calls that we've had in the past that a company like JP Morgan spends over $500 million a year on what to do when a security breach happens and what steps need to be taken. And they still get, attacked on a daily basis. They get hit because you'll get a new credit card from them saying, hey, we found some innocuous things on your account that we thought may be putting you at risk, so we gave you a new credit card. But does that really stop a threat actor who's determined? It definitely will not. But then what is the impact of the human error? Again, this is extremely important. How many times have you seen or heard where someone has poor password management? I've been doing, cybersecurity for a long time. And some of the easiest passwords I've ever seen, welcome 123, password, all lowercase. And it's usually the individuals that are at a higher level. It's going to be your CEOs, your CTOs, because they don't want to have to really spend a lot of time getting the information to put into the system, to log in. They just want it to be easy for them. But that puts you at risk. Because what happens is now, if I run any kind of lock crack, and I don't know if anyone remembers that one of my favorite programs a long time ago, I could find your password in about 20, 30 seconds. And then I could utilize that to start taking your data. But if you don't get the individuals in the executive suite to understand how important cybersecurity is, password management, policy and procedures are, then you've already failed the test. You've got to get buy-in from senior leadership in order to become and remain and maintain safe. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated. It's just something that has to happen. So what are some of the key components of effective training programs? Building a robust learning framework, curriculum development is extremely important, because let's say you're working at a bank, but you're talking about something that most of the individuals in that financial institution will not see on a daily basis or not recognize. Is it tailored specifically for you? Is it tailored for how your environment operates on a continuous basis and ongoing? You want to make it interactive, right? Interactive is the key, because if I'm just reading it and it sounds kind of drab, I'm probably going to stop paying attention in the first 5 or 6 minutes. But if it's going to actually get me to think outside of the proverbial box, then it's going to help me. It's going to be a simulation. It's going to role play. And people will see it and say, you know what? I had a very similar situation a couple of weeks ago. That actually made sense to me. But if you're looking at it and you're not making interactive, and then theoretically people they kind of disconnect because it doesn't really affect them. They don't see how it affects them. And you may have put a lot of time and effort for it, but it has to be interactive, and it has to be something that actually makes sense to them as they go through the training process. And then frequency and duration. And this has been a question since the beginning of cybersecurity starting. How often should you do it? Some people do it, I have several customers and clients right now that do it on a monthly basis. They have to. They want to. They want people to never forget the information that they should be looking out for. Some places will do it every quarter. Some places will do it twice a year. And, you have to find the right metric for yourself in order for you to remain compliant, for, whether it be SOC, whether it be ISO, or any of the other compliance frameworks that exist. You have to decide on which one you want to do and which one you feel like you can actually get more comfortable with, and it makes sense for the customer, for you, and the IT department going forward. So what are some of the best practices for cybersecurity, for security awareness training? maximizing training, relevance, and accuracy. Tailoring content to the audience, like we said before, it's got to make sense to the people who are looking at it. Incorporating real life scenarios, utilizing real life case studies, make training relatable to everyone that's doing it, and continuous reinforcement of training. Never let people forget. You want the events that you've seen or heard about from, CISA.gov or any of the major websites that actually produce information on a weekly basis. It has to make sense. And it's not just for people that work, in your group. It's not just for the finance team. It's not for the HR team. It's got to be for everyone. We've seen where Change Healthcare had this issue. MGM had the same issue because a lack of training put them at risk to almost fold their business. Change Healthcare is going to be a $1.5 billion cost across the board to get back to where they were before. And the thing that they're going to really have to work for is not even the security awareness training. It's going to be how they're perceived. Their reputational risk has increased exponentially because now if I'm a customer or I'm a potential customer, I don't trust that you're going to keep my data safe because you've already failed at that. So how do we make sure that you kind of build upon and show the steps of what you're trying to get back to? We want to make sure that we're doing consistent training. We want to make sure we're having conversations. Does the training make sense to you? Does it make sense to the individuals who are taking the training? Because you want to make sure you're having those conversations, whether they be tough or not, because that's the only way you're going to get better. Remember, your maturity level is based upon your reputation and everything that you do as a business going forward. Because if you don't have those two things interconnected, then you're going to miss one piece of it. And you want to make sure that you limit the flow of issues that you have by giving people the right amount of training, not too much. It's kind of like baking a cake. If you put too many eggs in it, it's going to be too dense. If you put too much moisture in it, it's going to fall apart. It's not going to hold itself. So you got to figure out what's the best rate to remain in compliance that you see fit for your company as you move forward in the future. Is there anything you wanted to add with that, Chris?
Sorry, I was stuck on mute. No, I think everything you're talking about here makes sense. And one of the early points that you made to Oscar that I wanted to reinforce is whether someone comes with good perspective and hygiene on security or they learn it here, it's kind of like what you do at work, you do at home, and what you do at home, you do at work. So if someone's lazy about it and doesn't really care or thinks there's no risk, that's kind of the attitude they're going to be coming in with. So as you're kind of incorporating them into the training, their hygiene, both personally and professionally, will improve. And also with many organizations, including ours, we have business applications running on our iPhones, our
Yeah.
smartphones. So, when I'm looking at my phone, is my brain kind of switching back and forth, like I'm going to be good here, but I don't have to worry about it there? No, we want to sit down and try to elevate the level of awareness and
Mhm.
education on this so it helps across both sides of that person's lifestyle or that person's
Yeah.
life and incorporating personal and professional. So this gamification
Mhm.
is a great way to do it. The incentives and rewards, it's a good way to kind of bring on some of the people that are, more
Mhm.
resistant, let's say, to it than those that really take it seriously. And we see that firsthand, as do the tool providers that are in this
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, and I thank you for mentioning the gamification of training. I think that's extremely important because, we've been playing games since we started growing, right? You've been playing games as you were a toddler, and the gamification of training makes it easier to comprehend the information and data points. So, when I'm doing something, I'm like, okay, so this game is asking me, what's the next step that I should take in the event of a security issue? Who should I contact? And it's going to be interactive to make you think about, and it's going to give you some answers that are close to the right answer. It's kind of like going through and taking your ACT or your SAT, and you're looking at the question like, wait a minute, I know this question, I know the answer to it, but how do I answer it that actually means the most, and I'm going to get the most points for? A lot of times, you see a lot of tools that are out there that are trying to make the gamification the true process, but you also have to have some learning aspects in it, and it has to be competitive. I need to beat the team that I'm competing against because I want to be the best person for cybersecurity in the future. And if I can do that, then not only do I feel good about my thought process and how I'm looking at information and data, but I'm also keeping my group safe by just playing the game, but also understanding that there's a lesson behind it. And you got to use, incentives and rewards, right? That's, if you say, okay, whoever's the first person to finish the training, you get a $50 gift card. You'll have almost a 95% completion done by the end of that first week, because people want to be first. We may not, everybody may not love sports the way a lot of people do, but if you give someone an incentive, they want to get it over with. That's how they look at it. I want to be first, get it done. I don't want to talk about it. I want to be the first person. They don't have to worry about it. But making something incentive driven helps people kind of really want to be the first. And you're always going to have stragglers, right? You'll have a training assessment and review process, and you say, all right, we're going to run this for 2 weeks, and then even in that last day, you'll still have 20 or 30 people that haven't finished it. And that's because they're thinking, well, am I really going to, does it going to matter? But everyone has to matter, and you have to tell them why it's important. Give them the reason of why they have to get this done. A lot of times people have a tendency to back off the closer it gets, and you're going to have people on vacation from time to time, but make it incentive driven to make it easier for them to want to be part of the process initially. And then feedback mechanisms for improvement. What did we do wrong today? What could we have done to make it an improved viewpoint on this process? How do we talk about the adjustments of making the learning experience better for not only myself, but for the individuals who are taking it? So you got to, look at it with a holistic view, make sure that it makes sense to everyone, but at the same time, ensure that what you're trying to convey is actually conveyed properly. Now, measuring training effectiveness. How do you assess the impact of educational interventions? KPIs. People have been doing heat maps and KPIs for the longest. Includes metrics such as completion rate, pass rates on assessments. How many times did the individual have to go through the testing? Did they have to take it 3 or 4 times? Did they have to take it? Did they get it right on the first time? Are people paying attention to it? And sometimes I will actually throw in a curveball, and I'll send out a company that definitely does not have like a dress code, and it'll be just to see who's paying attention. Sometimes you got to throw a curveball in and make sure that people are still looking at the data the right way. And then surveys and assessment. This goes back to what we stated earlier about post-training surveys and assessment to find out, what is it being effective? What can we make changes to? How can we make sure that people are understanding the data, and sending out, just a very light survey with a couple of questions that pertains to the test to see if that information is being retained. A lot of times people, as soon as they take the test, they forget about it. A lot of people are great test takers, but if you ask them a question outside of that, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Is this the same place that we work? So it's really about making sure that the information sticks. You want to make sure that the information has a long-term impact. You want to make sure that it has a short-term impact. And so you think about long-term and short-term, because you could have an event tomorrow. Are you prepared? Are you ready? Long-term, 3 months from now, before we kick off our next training session, do people still retain that information? Do they still remember what they saw? Do they still remember about the hovering technique? Do they understand why it's important that we're doing this and we're keeping an eagle eye on the information that's coming through our environment? We've seen situations where, through security awareness, and not even training, but just an event where someone will send a check. And I've seen this several times in my career. Someone will send out a check of a company that's based in Asia. And the request comes in on a Friday afternoon. And you're thinking, well, this is definitely something that I've seen before, because it happens every day. You get a $95,000 check sent from the finance department over to Asia over the weekend, but you have a certain amount of time that if you notice it, you can pull that money back. And that 72 hours, after the 72-hour time frame, it's gone forever. But you have 72 hours. If you send an erroneous amount to a company that does not exist, the FBI would need to be involved. You have to make sure that you're doing your OFACs and everything of that nature, but it happens. And it's lack of training, and people being so busy these days. We all are busy at work. We all have 1,000 things that are going on behind us that we're trying to figure out to make sure that we're doing correctly. And people will make mistakes. And you got to have a plan in place in order to basically correct that mistake, and then make sure that that person goes through training to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But it happens daily. I mean, I could show you a list of things that have occurred in the last 6 months that will blow your mind. How much money has been lost by people just not really paying attention to what they should be doing.
And I think I want to add one thing that we saw.
Oh, sure.
We have an incident response practice. We get damaged and bruised customers almost every weekend coming in looking for help because they didn't do all the due diligence, they didn't do the training, they didn't have backups to recover all that. And one of them was a refi company, a mortgage refinance company, and there was an email that went to the owner of a home that had a letter that looked official. That they said, hey, to refi this, just this is the final view. Click on here, you're all done. They said, hey, this I'm just going to do a double check. They called the phone number inside of the email, talked to somebody at customer service, felt comfortable, moved the money. $487,000 was being refied. The threat actor came in, intercepted the real email, changed the phone number, changed the account number. So this is actually not just like a kid in the basement any longer. These are sophisticated attempts to sit down and trick you. And with AI, it's getting easier and easier, like I said, to sit down and make
Yeah,
something less and less obvious.
yeah,
So the
it
person
is.
thought they were doing the right thing, and they didn't find out for almost, I think it was 45 days, because they got the second statement thinking,
Mhm.
oh, paperwork didn't process. They just sent me the first, bill, my old bill. It was when they got the second one that they were checking again, and that's when they found out. And like Oscar said, the money was gone 72 hours later.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
these are, if you're not aware, if you're not questioning, if you're just like clicking on anything, that's huge. And one of the other points that I'm not sure we made yet is if you think you've done something wrong as an individual, and this is what we'd want to convey to all the employees, let someone know. It's better to sit down and be, have cried wolf
Mhm.
than know that you might have broken the lamp and you're not going to tell anybody, hope that no one notices, because it
Yeah.
isn't the lamp. It could take down the entire company. So
It-
that's a big lesson learned too, is to sit down and speak up if you see something or think you did something wrong.
I think you're spot on, Chris. I think that terrifies people when they feel like they've made a mistake, and it's a financial mistake. They don't want to tell anyone. They want to kind of hold, like I'm sure somebody will see this at a later time, and then we'll talk about it. But the quicker you say something, it actually allows us to correct that issue a lot sooner. If you wait over a period of time, most of the time there's nothing that can be done. But that brings us to another question, and I would like for the individuals who are attending this call, what environments do you think are actually more susceptible to a security breach? Do you think it would be a financial institution? Do you think it would be a hospital or healthcare environment? Do you think it would be more so like a smaller company, doesn't have a lot of controls? I don't personally think that they are on the radar, but I think financial city governments, I think they are definitely susceptible to happening. I've mentioned in the past about the issues in Fulton County in Georgia, where they could have spent $50,000 to fix the issue, where they had a Windows 95 machine sitting in a dark room with no air conditioning. It had been sitting there for over 15 years, and no one had thought about it, but they still needed it to run. And they were told by a company, not ours, but they were told by a company what they needed to do in order to correct that issue before it became a full-blown problem. And they said, no, we don't want to spend the money to do that. And it ended up costing them $3.5 million. So, and people still don't trust the system because of what happened. So it does happen, and it does occur, but I would be very interested to know what the individuals in this call think would be some of the more susceptible environments. And also tell us whether or not you're part of that environment. If you're part of, the healthcare environment, if you're part of a financial institution, we would love to know that.
Well, and I can add one
Okay.
bit of color for the group, and this is something that we see because we have that, like I mentioned, we have the incident response team, but also this is backed up by organizations like Verizon that has a huge security practice, as well as IBM and the FBI. 40% of small businesses, of the small businesses that are hacked, 40% of those are out of business in 6 months if in fact they have a breach that turns into a delay of more than a day or two. So if you look at practical terms, it's hard to sit down and kind of replace. If all of a sudden Amazon had an issue, we'd all be upset. We might change our passwords or whatever, but we're still going to do business. If there's some small business that you interact with as a company, they're probably replaceable on some level. And if they're at risk, you're going to go find somebody else to sit down and do that business, whether it's the same size company or larger. So the brand hit and the income hit and the financial impact overall, that's where that 40% number comes for the SMB market. So while they might not be the greatest target, they're at the greatest risk of survivability compared to a large firm.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so let's talk about the common obstacles faced by organizations. Budget constraints. I don't want to pay that much money for training. Lack of leadership. Leadership team does not want to spend the money for training because they look like they think it's important, but they don't want to spend the money for the initial portion of it. And that comes to the lack of leadership buy-in, which I stated before, and general apathy towards security training. Like, oh, here we go again. We got to do some more training. I thought we did training last week. And that can affect two things: morale and your security overall frameworks. And how is it being taken? Is it being done seriously? Is it something that's an afterthought? Is it something that you want to talk about, but you don't have the time to talk about? The goal is to make it as easy as possible. Because if you make it difficult, people will shy away from it. They won't do it. And then you'll end up having to make changes to your own awareness training because of people not wanting to do it and not wanting to take the time to review it with you. So you want to, implement strategies, senior management support, and emphasizing the personal relevance of security, how it can help people become better. And people are going to push back. They're going to, especially if you do it on a monthly basis. I've had companies that do it on a weekly basis, which I thought was way too much. But if you set that mindset, at least initially, it becomes easier over a period of time. If you tell people who are starting in the company, hey, we do training every week because here is the reason why. And it's normally the companies that have had issues in the past. They've been, they've had a breach, they've had a ransomware event, and they don't want to ever see that happen again because they know how much time and effort they had to put into to get around that and get aboard and get above that as well. So, it's just making sure that you're not overbearing, but at the same time doing it just right, like the cake. So just think about it as a baking event. It'll be a lot easier for you. So maintaining engagement over time. People are going to ebb and flow. You're going to have people that leave the company and join the company. How often are you going through the training? So you want to make sure you sustain the interest in the people that are taking the training and making sure that they're part of the process. Because if you make people a part of the process of security awareness training, they have now invested their time and effort and they want to be a part of the conversation. They want to be, the person that finishes first. They want to be that. But if you never talk to them about it, if you never really go over it, you do your reporting, but you don't talk to the individuals that work for you, they'll lose interest fairly quickly. And you want to avoid that as much as you possibly can.
I think from an overall strategy perspective, Oscar and his team are highly recommending to every one of our customers and anybody that will listen to sit down and make sure that you have an onboarding and offboarding policy. What
Oh,
do you do
definitely.
from an IT perspective? What do you do from a training perspective? What do you do certainly on the onboarding side with having them do X number of videos in the first 30 days or whatever it is? But then having the quarterly repetition, and I mean repetition of training, not the same information but evolved learning going on and on. And then, as Oscar mentioned early on, if you have people that are not doing well or having to take something two or three times, they're getting the reinforced training as opposed to the regular cadence training. It really should be a minimum of twice a year. Really, quarterly is ideal and I think acceptable by many organizations and many people that you don't feel like you're just kind of pushing through the buttons to get through it as quickly as possible. You're actually learning something.
Yes, absolutely. So in conclusion and, a future, summary of the key insights, we know security awareness is training and is extremely essential, right? It's effective education, but it has to be tailored. It has to be engaging, and you want to make sure that it's gamified at some point as well, but you want to make sure that it makes sense for your environment. Emerging trends, integration of AI is going to be prevalent. We're not getting away from that. Machine learning is not going anywhere. IoT devices is not going anywhere. But the effectiveness and the growth importance of mental health is extremely important as well. So you got to think about, does this question make sense for everyone on the team? How does it make sense? So you want to drill down as much as you possibly can because you want to ask those questions of yourself. Because if you're going through the training and it makes sense to you, it will most likely make sense to the other individuals that are taking it. But when you get away from that and you stop questioning it, then is the information still fresh? Is it still relevant to what you're doing today versus what you want to do in the future. And then the call to action, must prioritize training as a critical component of their strategy. It has to be a part of it. You have to think about it on a daily basis to make it fun and also understanding. And how do you employ, innovative practices and foster a culture of proactive engagement? That's extremely important. And then the key takeaways, why is it crucial? Employees are the critical line of defense. They're gonna be the first person to see anything. They're gonna be the first person to say anything. Phishing and social engineering, test people on this. There are common attack vectors that can be mitigated with effective security awareness training, and it has to be regular, ongoing. And I think we drilled through that quite a bit on this call. We talked about, differences between weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannually, which I don't think you should go that far, but definitely if you're doing it every quarter, that makes it easy because you get to run the report and see the metrics and the KPIs. And how do you measure its effectiveness? Just making sure that you're asking the questions, talking to your clients that are actually going through the information and data points. Extremely important to do that. So here are the next steps: schedule a consultation with the team, assess your current posture. We conduct a thorough assessment of your current training program and develop a customized roadmap. Chris, I will hand it over to you, sir.
Yep. So a couple of housekeeping again. We will definitely send out the PowerPoint. We'll send out the recording for you. You can definitely set up a time with us if you'd like to sit down and have a conversation. We can get into some of the tools. We use 3 different training platforms right now, security awareness training platforms, depending on goal, complexity of need, and also budget. I wouldn't call one basic, but there's 3 different choices we could look at. So it's a very consultative approach and how it fits into the overall program. And as you can see on the screen, we've got 3 more webinars coming up. The ones that happen to have red dates are not our typical Thursday, so that's why we're calling those out. But really want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you for the time. And if there's any follow-up questions, you can certainly reach out to us. But I will get this information to you as soon as we get the recording back from Zoom. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody. Oscar, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.